what's up? Okay, so I'm gonna make a little video, try to make it briefer, as brief as it needs to be. But I want to talk about Trump. I always talk about Trump though, but I guess I kind of want to go over. I just kind of had a thought, right? As I was kind of stepping into an elevator, and it was like, if I were to talk to somebody and I'm kind of like, yeah, I'm in support of Trump, but are you the kind of person that's going to be able to hear me out? If I was a Trump supporter, would you even be able to hear me out? Or actually, I think it's more what do you think? Almost the first question shouldn't be me justifying why I support Trump. More why do you think I support Trump? Let's see what do you come up with, right? Because we're in such a hot time where it's people are just making assumptions, and it's kind of I wonder how, because that would kind of show a lot of how they see Trump, right? And this is how they view Trump, and how other people probably, because it's not necessarily this is what they think is about Trump, but this is why they think I support Trump. So they may already know something about me, but I can be why do you think I might support Trump? What are things that you think I might support him for? And if they just rattle off a bunch of crazy stuff of you're in support of the insurrection, you're in support in support of white supremacy, and you're in support of all this stuff, I'd be okay, so then now after that it's kind of okay, so are you open to listening and understanding and accepting my actual reasons for liking Trump, for being in support of him? And if they're yeah, I mean, I can do that, because it's kind of well, they just made a bunch of assumptions, right? And now they have to kind of address what it is that I have to bring to the table, and it's going to be different from what they said. So their entire response then is kind of I can take all of the crazy stuff that they want to presume about me that they get off of Trump, and I can just say, this is actually why. And so I kind of want to get into what it is that I support him mostly for, in a sense, why a lot of this other stuff doesn't matter to me, right? So my number one reason is because while he was in office, and I was afraid that this wasn't going to happen, but I was afraid that what I was afraid of when he got into office, and why I didn't support him in the beginning, because I thought he was crazy, and I thought that he would get us into more wars, and that he would exasperate the problems and the conflicts that we have. And so I was oh, that's a really scary thing. But after I saw what happened with Kim Jong-un, and there was a lot of pressure there, and that got pretty scary, but it turned out very positive, right? And I know the media wanted to spin, and they wanted to say, oh, they're just legitimizing Kim Jong-un. And the way I see it, and that's fine if they want to be oh, North Korea is a legitimate country now, blah blah blah. If that's how they see it, I really don't care, because I'd rather not have enemies and try to bridge peace between nations, right? And so when all of that happened, even after he was if you want to try something, we'll bomb the shit out of you, right? And I was okay. So it was okay, so it turns out, he was all right, I'll back down, I'm not gonna mess around. And he propagandizes, his own people with, whatever the message is that he's trying to throw out there. And I was okay. And he's but we started to get a good
good relations between North Korea and South Korea. So that was a really big positive to me. He did there were some scary things, like what he did when he bombed the Iranian dude, the strategist guy or whatever. That was pretty freaky. There's things that he does that I don't like, but one of the difficult things is kind of understanding and accepting that sometimes people do things and they take actions, and it's not necessarily the actions that are taken that matter the most, but it's the end consequence, right? Given context and given how things work out. Like if you're expecting this action is going to result in this really bad thing, and that doesn't happen, then you kind of have a win, right? Then you kind of have a bit of a win, because when he bombs, the guy strikes, kills like the driver and the guy, the strategist in Iran, and Iran turns around and they say, we're going to bomb this base and this base or whatever as retaliation for what you just did, and we're giving you guys like a 30-minute heads up, so everybody just gets to get up and run the hell out. Not everybody, nobody dies, but some people are injured, and it was pretty traumatic. It was a pretty crazy situation, and Trump did kind of put those people in those positions, and that's a really unfortunate thing. But in the grand scheme of things, in the grand thing, it didn't end badly. It actually ended very good, right? And same thing for North Korea. And he brokered peace between, what was it, Bosnia? I can't remember all these names. But he did it with all these things. He moved the embassy to Jerusalem. He did all this stuff, and through all of this stuff, and everybody's like, oh my God, this is gonna cause more problems, and it's gonna cause more problems, and everybody was freaking out. But more problems didn't crop up. And so I kind of have to stop and look at that and be like, okay, you are clearly able to do something that past presidents haven't been able to do. You're able to push the envelope, you're able to push things, and it results in peace. It results in the halting of more fighting, right? Kills the dude in Iran. That guy in Iran can no longer strategize, ambush attacks on American soldiers in other countries and in Afghanistan and all that. And so, or in Iran and Afghanistan, wherever he wants to kind of work all this stuff. So it was just amazing. And I really appreciated that this is the pathway that he was going, and he was getting these results. And I was more in favor of the results. I was much more in favor of the results than the process and the pathway that he took to get those results. But those results outweigh the process to me, right? I think that principles and how you go about things is really important, especially when you're setting a precedent. And I don't think that he really he did a lot of talk stuff. There was a lot of stuff where he talked. And I think that that's probably a lot of what people's biggest problems with him were. It wasn't so much like, he did this thing. Like, there wasn't a whole lot of policy stuff that people really lost it on. It was just kind of stuff that he said. And a lot of the stuff that he said, and this is something that I had to kind of like discover later, after I kind of like cleansed my palate of him by not paying any attention to him for like 6 months straight and just kind of letting him kind of dissipate. And then I would start kind of listening to what other people were saying about him. And I basically had intermediary translators kind of telling me, okay, this is what happened, and this is what they're saying, and this is what it actually means. And I was like, okay, well, that actually makes sense, and then I would go back and I would see, so when they said he was being racist towards all Mexicans and that they're all like these awful, terrible people, which I bought into that narrative, I went back and I listened to it, and I was like, the whole thing. And I was like, with his context, not his opposition's context. And I think that that's actually a really important thing to kind of note, is that when you have the opposition's context and you're going off of that, you're adopting the worst interpretation possible. Now, imagine if you lived in a world where all of the information that everybody is getting about you, it all comes from your opponents, your worst enemies, the people who like you the least, right? They're the ones who are listening to it, and they're going in there saying, oh yeah, Jordan says this and this is what he means. Jordan said this and this is, I can't believe it. And they're reactionary towards it. And then that just gets spread out so frequently that eventually all they need to do when they do hear me is they've already built up this negative narrative. And so this negative narrative is just going to come back on me. And it's an automatic thing. So, there's a lot of stuff that I think that people aren't really thinking about in these kind of interactions, in the way that people are thinking about things, the way that people are receiving their information. And I think that people really need to stop and kind of check themselves a little bit, because there's a lot of craziness. There's a lot of crazy. And when the media just goes out, I saw this thing. What was it? It was the Italian, and I was like, this is a perfect example. It was like the new Italian president or prime minister or whatever they call her, right? I don't know much about this, but she was a conservative. She was a conservative, and everybody was surprised. They're like, oh my God, this is like, we didn't expect that a conservative would win this. And so then they go, and the narrative line that they just push out over and over and over again, and it's just a bunch of talking heads from all over the place, all these different channels, and they have this little tagline where they're like, a conservative, and it's a woman too, like a conservative woman, she wins the election. Excuse me. This conservative woman, she wins this election. And their taglines that they run off of is that she's a right-wing semi-fascist, and they haven't had a politician like this since World War II. So they're basically calling on, Hitler. They're basically, in a roundabout way, calling her Hitler. And it's just kind of like, I don't know anything about her. I know nothing about her. But something that I've learned is that when you have these establishment media talking heads, and they keep on repeating the same thing, right-wing extremist, semi-fascist, World War II, close to, like, we haven't had this kind of extremism since World War II. Whenever I hear things like that, I have to immediately dismiss it as being accurate, because all it ever ends up being, as from my experience, all of these labels that people just kind of toss out there, if somebody calls somebody a Nazi, if somebody calls somebody a fascist, if somebody calls somebody a racist, if somebody calls somebody a homophobe or a transphobe, or whatever the label is, I have to just dismiss it. I have to dismiss it offhand and then investigate it for myself to find if it's even valid or true. And I can't do it off of just quick little clips. These little clips, they're not gonna paint the picture. They're not gonna do it. And so when I eventually do kind of look into it, I'm like, oh, okay, with the context and from their perspective and all this stuff, I can see that clearly this is not them. And one of the main reasons that I am so quick to just toss out all of these labels is because I've personally been hit with every label in the book, knowing that I'm not any of it, right? I'm not a fascist. I'm not a racist. I'm not a homophobe. I'm not a transphobe. You know, I'm not any of these things. And so when you're just simply trying to have a conversation or gain information, or you have an opinion that differs somewhat, and you just get lashed with these horrible labels, it's kind of like, like first what I first do is I kind of check myself, and I'm like, wait, is this a really a racist position? Is this a transphobic position? Is this a fascist position? Like, what is this position? And then I kind of have to stop and think and be like, okay, well, it's this and this and this and then this and this, and like, no, it's not racist at all. It's not transphobic at all. Like, you know, and so when I've kind of received that kind of treatment from the people that I most associated myself with, and that was one of the crazy things, is that like it was my own side, which was the left, that was throwing these labels at me. And I remember the first time when I was like, this, like, they've lost it. Like, they've lost the plot. They've lost their validity. I don't know how I can take them seriously anymore. What happened was basically, I call it the fish food incident, where Trump had fish food, and then it showed a close-up of him taking the fish food and dumping it all out at once in the into the koi pond in Japan, right? And there was just clips of that, and people I saw on Facebook in this group, and it was more of a private group, but I was like, I would see people going, what the hell, blah, blah, blah. He's a terrible president. He doesn't understand culture. He doesn't know what he's doing. He's making us look like a fool. Oh my God. And it was just like this it's like they're just beating on themselves and using him as the weapon to just smack themselves, being like, I can't believe that this is us. Oh my God, the world thinks that this is us. And then I go and I look at it, and there's like a video that's like zoomed out and it's longer, and it's like the prime minister, the president of Japan, he dumps his out. He kind of goes, huh, and just tosses it all out. And then Trump kind of goes, and tosses some, and then he takes it and goes, whoosh. And it was like, okay, so he did nothing wrong here. He did absolutely nothing wrong. This seemed like a great, perfectly fine visit. And so I was like, I think I made a comment that was effectively like, you know, I don't think that this is the way that we should, like, this is valid criticism. I don't think that this is it. There's lots of other stuff that you can get him on. There's lots of other stuff you could be mad at him on. But I think that it's important for us to be accurate in our criticisms, and accurate in, just accurate in our criticisms. If we're going to say, like, he's not doing something, or he doesn't know something, or whatever, like, we need to be accurate, right? We can't just be making things up and just running off of it because it paints him in a bad light. Because then it just becomes ideological. Because I was asked a little bit ago of, like, what's the difference between principle and ideological? And they're very similar, but because they're both kind of processes. Now, principle is basically starting at one point and then using the principles in order to reach whatever the conclusion ends up being, and then you kind of accept what that conclusion is. What an ideology is it doesn't care about the pathway and how you get there. It already has its conclusion. So it's going to form anything that it needs to in order to reach that conclusion. So if the ideology is that Trump is bad, if that the ideological take on it is that Trump is bad, you're going to pick out everything that is ideologically, you're going to pick out every situation is going to be the worst possible interpretation that you can get because it serves your ideology. So there's And that's something that I think, like, that's something is something that maybe you have to learn. You kind of have to learn that or experience it. You have to witness it, and you have to care. You have to care about it. So when you're not operating off of principles, then you're operating ideologically, and there's no. And for me, it's kind of like I've always operated on principle. I never operated on ideological. But one of the problems is when you have a narrative. When you're attached to a narrative, you can follow your principles, but if you're being fed information and you're on the narrative that the interpretations are accurate and they're all negative, it can be difficult to even interpret something more objectively and more charitably. So it kind of, and for a lot of people, I think, it can take, like, you have to have a moment where you're open, where you can open yourself up and say, you know what, I'll give him a chance. And I did. I gave him a chance. As soon as he became president, I was like, I'll give him a chance. I got to take a break, but I'll give him a chance, see what he does, see how he does. And if he starts getting into wars, I'm going to be really upset. I'm really not going to be happy about it, because that's more of exactly what I've seen from all the other previous presidents. So I will, I'll give him a shot. And after a while, I was like, he's not getting into wars. He's not doing all this stuff. But that's when I kind of verbalized that, that I was even giving him a shot. I was giving him a fair shake, right? When I would verbalize that in whatever way it was, in this instance, it was the fish food, I would just be lambasted with all kinds of, I was a racist, I was a white supremacist, I was a Nazi, I was a transphobe, I was like anything that they thought that he supported, they attached that to me, and I was supported by the same things. I lost friends. I lost friends because of it. And people are just so ideologically possessed. And that's one of the scary things, is like you're not even giving yourself an opportunity to change your mind. You're just like, he's bad. And look at the state of the world right now as compared to what it was in 2017, 18, 19. And I really just mostly choose those years because 2020 was just kind of like this block of dead space where like we were all kind of going through a crisis. And I think Trump handled it well enough. I think he handled it well enough. And I think that the evidence of that even is kind of demonstrated by the fact that there were more COVID deaths in post-vaccine that Trump brought out. There were more deaths then than there were during all of his term in COVID, right? So it's like people were gonna die, people were dying, things were rough. But you kind of look at the scene now, and like all through 2020, it was like, or all through 2020, it was like, here's the death toll, blah, blah, scare, frightened, you're scared, everybody's gonna die, oh my God, everybody's an enemy, if you don't do this, then you're a terrible person, and you're actively murdering other people. And it was just kind of like, when I see this, I don't understand. I mean, I guess I do understand, but it's frustrating when you have that kind of an ideological push, right? Like the ideology says Trump is bad, and then COVID happens, and it's like, hey, here's a perfect opportunity to take any and every single thing that he ever says regarding this and twisting and warping it to suit our ideological agenda, right? So when he gets up and he says, Trump's like, we're doing everything we can. We've got scientists, we've got people on it. We're looking at we noticed that the sunlight, it doesn't last very long in the sun. and then we have disinfectant. We noticed that disinfectant just kind of wipes it all out, right? And so, we've got some stuff that we're kind of looking at with the sun, and maybe there's something we can do with something with the concept of disinfectant. Maybe there's something we can do to kind of wash the system out, that kind of cleanses the system. And to me, when I interpret that, because I'm able to interpret it charitably, when I heard that, I was like, okay, he's doing what he can to find solutions. He's suggesting things, and he even says, like, I mean, this is all up to the professionals. This is all up to the scientists to figure this stuff out. But I took it as, and then he starts talking about hydroxychloroquine, and like ivermectin comes out. I don't even know if he said anything about ivermectin. Maybe he did, probably, I'll presume so. But to me, all of these things are possible solutions. These are rays of hope. These are things that we can look forward to. There is a light at the end of the tunnel, and you can see that we are working on it. We are working on it. We have this drug, we have hydroxychloroquine, and we've seen things maybe work, maybe not. We're not really sure. We need to do more studies. We need to do more stuff. But you can rest assured, we are working on it. We don't have all the answers yet, but we're looking at it. Maybe there is something that we can inject into ourselves and it cleanses our system. Maybe there is something we can do with the sunlight. Maybe there is some kind of pill that will help us, right? Help us as a treatment. And then what ends up happening? Regeneron, right? Regeneron is something that you inject into your system. And what does it do? It cleanses your system. So, but if you're not going to be able to accept that the interpretation that, that's factually like what happened. He said, something with disinfectant, maybe the concept of rinsing, cleansing something. That's not, hey, go inject bleach into your system. I find that the media's portrayal of and the twisting of what he says far more dangerous, because you're basically getting people on the other side. It's kind of hard to figure out, but you're basically creating a narrative that something to do is to inject bleach. Like, if they had just been silent on that, if they had just been like, yeah, I kind of know what he's up to. I know what he's doing, Like, I know what he means. And I think if you were charitable to him at all, I think you would be able to figure out what he means. Which is what I just explained. Like, we're working on it. But when they don't even do that, and they're just like, oh yeah, he's saying horse tranquilizers and hydroxychloroquine and injecting bleach into people's systems, and you're kind of creating a narrative that maybe it is a solution. And how that can even operate is like, you can have people who are so anti-establishment that they will just do whatever is the opposite of what the establishment media says. So if the establishment media is like, Trump says that you should inject bleach or drink bleach or whatever, and then it's like, and they're like, no, you can't do that, that doesn't work. And then you're gonna get the dummies out there, and they're gonna be like, man, fuck, screw these establishment people. Like, they don't know what they're talking about. Glug glug, and they start chugging some bleach or whatever. Or they use it as an excuse to kill their husband, like poison their husband to death. Which also happened. They took, what was it? Hydroxychloroquine, which was also in like a fish tank cleaner or something. It was something like that, whatever it was. And it was like, okay, it was amazing to me that they would, to me, that's so much more dangerous. Because if they were just like, no, like, if they didn't even say anything, but that's what the narrative will also do, is the narrative will create a narrative, it will create a system, an ideological system that forces people to come to the same kind of conclusion, right? So it'll be like, when he says, oh yeah, disinfectant, when he says disinfectant and inject in the same sentence, people are just they're gonna filter out everything else. They're gonna filter out all the other words and all the other context, and they're gonna think inject bleach into your system, inject disinfectant into your system. And then when you have stupid, moronic corporations like Lysol is like, do not consume. This is not for consumption. It will not help you with COVID. Like, and then when you do that, it's just kind of like, here's just more ideological possession and a more ideological, narrative just being reinforced. And it's like, none of his Trump supporters thought that injecting bleach, I mean, you could ask anybody, ask any Trump supporter, hey, do you think that injecting bleach would be a good idea to help prevent COVID? No. I don't think anybody's gonna think that at all. Nobody's gonna think that at all, right? But it's the people who don't believe that, but they want to believe it so badly that that's what he said, that because it makes him look bad, because it makes him seem bad, and all that they care about, they don't care about the truth, they don't care about the actual perception of him and his supporters, they don't care about that. They just want to reframe things, push it out there, and make people hate him, make people think that he's actively out there to try to take you out. Now, he did make mistakes. I think that he did make mistakes. I think that while it was good intentioned, I think that and it's interesting to me that nobody even on the right or on the left even complains about this, but I feel like it was a big problem, is that he manufactured a ton of the intubation machines, right? I can't remember what they call them right now, but you need help breathing, right? Now, though, that can save some people's lives, but what it can also do is it can effectively kill them, because once you get intubated and you go unconscious and you're unconscious long enough, and they may not be able to bring you back, right? Whereas if you had just kind of sat there and suffered through it and were just kind of like helped and aided and treated and all this stuff, like you could have a mask on that just pumps more oxygen and maybe develop something there. So I think that there was something more that could have been done differently. I think that the intubation machines ended up being not the best thing, not the best solution for these people. But I understand, and it was honestly very impressive that he would rush out and manufacture these things at a ridiculous rate. He manufactured PPE at a ridiculous rate. I mean, it took some time. It took a short amount of time to get those masks to get developed, but that's just a supply chain issue. And so what ended up happening, I mean, it was pretty crazy, because it was like, okay, we gotta rest, we gotta hang out. Another issue that I thought that he did, or that I had, was what was it? I'm trying to remember what they called it. It was basically where they were giving people who were unemployed like an extra $600. So if you lost your job, then you can get unemployment plus $600. And I thought that was way too much. And I thought that they made that lasted way too long. People got that it was a very long time that people got that. And I think that it created a larger problem of people effectively that we're dealing with now, of people not wanting to go to work. Maybe people saved up enough, or some people got a car just outright. Yeah, it wasn't working, and I got through my unemployment and the extra $600 that I got from it, I don't need to work, or screw it, I don't need to get a job because I'm getting unemployment and an extra $600, and that extra $600 made it so that they were effectively making more than if they were working, right? And I think that went on way too long. You should have shut that down. But other general kind of criticisms of COVID for Trump, I don't really have much, because I think that it's not his fault. I don't think that it's his fault that the mainstream media, that the establishment media takes everything that he says, twists and warps it, and then throws it back out to the public in the most heinous and heinous way possible. And I think it's designed specifically to get people to hate him. And I don't think that that's a good way that we should really go about things. I think that that's actually a really bad way to do things. Because we should actually like our president. Like, we should at least kind of like be okay. But then I can sit here and I can look at Biden, and it's like, you know, what happened as soon as Biden got in? Like, Biden hasn't not done good things. He's done some good things, but there's a good chunk of stuff that I don't like. In Afghanistan, I think, is the biggest one. Here, I'll lay it out a little bit as briefly as I can. What he did in Afghanistan, I think, was probably the worst possible move that you ever could have done. It's hard for me to even imagine a worse call than what he did in Afghanistan. I think the plan was simple. The plan was simply provide air support, start to move your guys out, keep a close watch on anybody who's trying to invade. You can bomb those guys, you can shoot those guys, you can stop them from bum rushing, right? And you should be expecting that when you leave, the moment that you leave, that's what's going to happen. And they were like, he was like, I've got 31 advisors, and none of them expected this to happen or happen so quickly. And I was like, I don't know how you couldn't think that this was going to happen and happen this quickly. And to have no advisors and no plan against it. So he flew out all of his own people, and then he had to bring in, like, flew out like 2,500, and then he had to bring 4,000 back in order to evacuate and help some of the other people. And then you had people clinging onto planes as they were taking off and they were falling. And I seriously doubt anybody that was outside of the plane survived that trip. I think they probably all died. You know, and it's just like they left all of the equipment there. Like it really seemed like it was almost like purposeful. It really, like, if you were to like listen to some audios from the past and how I think it was like a General Clark, I think it was, he was like, yeah, you know, they came to me and they were like, yeah, we got a list, and here's all the countries that we're going to be destabilizing. Here's 7 countries that we're going to work on destabilizing in 5 years. This is way back in 2008 or 2006 or something like that he was, I think it might have been 2008, when Clark gave this speech. You could look it up. It's like FHA General Clark or something. And so on that list was like Afghanistan, to destabilize it, leave it in ruins, right? And it's like, to just pick up and leave like that, I feel like it's just gonna assure. And then his justification was, hey, you know what, this is a good thing because it was over, like, we're done, we're out. And that's how he sells it. I don't regret it at all. I think it was perfect. Everything was fine. You know, it's like, dude, the country is we just wasted 20 years over there, and now they're destabilized, and it's worse. And it's worse because now a group of terrorists, the Taliban, they're in control of it, right? And it's just like, and who knows? I mean, the establishment, all they have to do is just be like, hey, you know what? Whenever we want, when you guys start getting stable or whatever, we can just mess with you a little bit. We know you already have heightened tensions, so we can coax you to do something. Coax you to do something, to attacks, clap back. And it's like, and all that does is just restart the cycle. But I think that that's what the establishment wants. They want these conflicts, and that's why when Trump left, very shortly after that, Russia invades Ukraine, and what do? We say, hey, you know what? We can't fight in this war, but we can participate by proxy, and we're going to take $45 billion. It's much more at this point. We're going to take $45 billion, billion with a B, right? And we're going to give it to them. We're not selling them any of these weapons. We're taking our taxpayer dollars, my money, your money, everybody's money, and we're giving that money to them in weapons and in equipment. And I get like, okay, hey, you know what? They're a democracy and but they're also like the most corrupt, at least at the time. They were the most corrupt country on the planet. And it was well known. I had been talking about, geez, I can't believe that, like, how corrupt they are. I mean, it was crazy. Like, this is before even the Zelensky tapes or whatever, right? And it was like, it was just crazy how they took that. And it's like nobody even knows. Like nobody could even point out at the time. Nobody going to point out where Ukraine was, but they were sold. And they sold a lie, and like, hey, you know what? Like, we got to stand up for Ukraine. So it's like, before, nobody cared about Ukraine, even through the all the Trump phone call drama. Nobody cared about Ukraine. If people cared about Ukraine, they should have added them into NATO, or they should have provided them with all the weapons long beforehand so that they can defend themselves, so that we don't have to just be like, and on top of that, this is not our war. This is not our proxy war. We should be dealing with issues that are around our country, that are around our side of the world. That's what we should be focused on, not going and giving money to the enemy of a partial ally that we know is hyper corrupt. Like, there's so many things that kind of are just off about the entire situation. And that's not even to mention anything that with Hunter Biden and working in Ukraine at Burisma, and the corruption that is very it seems like there was corruption. Like, if you were just to kind of hazard a guess, if I were to hedge my bets, I think that I would bet on there being corruption rather than there not being corruption between Hunter Biden and Burisma, and even attached to it is Joe Biden. And so, like, these are things that he did. Oh, the other thing about Afghanistan, I don't want to forget this, is that when he left in the dead of night on a Friday, where while the American public slept, and then got up and went on on their sunny day vacations. They went down to the beach like I did, and because a lot of people, they just turn off news, they turn off all this stuff on the weekends, and it's not until Monday, because they're like, you know what, I don't want to deal with this stuff. That's a weekday thing. All this crazy news is a weekday thing. And so come Monday, I'm like, oh, Afghanistan is already lost. Like, there's nothing anybody can even do. It's just kind of like, where are we at? Where are we at now? What are we going to do? So, there's a lot that I can criticize, and I think very fairly. I can criticize Biden on. And I think that really, unfortunately, I think that a lot of the criticism that goes with Trump is pretty well unfounded, and I think that it's I get if people want to say, he's vulgar and he says things in kind of a funky way that I don't like to hear. He messes with my interpretations of things, and and part of that I blame the media for crafting the narrative that causes you to think that, to view it like that. But I don't think that I don't know. I don't think that Trump has been given a fair hand. And I think that a lot of the things that people really don't like him over are things that he's said, right? And oftentimes things that he has said that have been taken out of context or warped or had a narrative attached to it that causes you to think the worst, to take the worst interpretation. But I think that at the time, during his whole presidency, like, what were our major issues? What were the things that people were complaining about with Trump? They were complaining about the things he was saying. They weren't complaining about a lot of the things that he was doing, because he really wasn't doing a whole lot that was like really bad. He wasn't doing. I think a lot of people would be hard pressed, and I think that if people did have an issue with something, I think it would be a very subjective thing. And it would be something that's like, is this typical of a Republican? Yeah, it's typical of a Republican. Okay, so I can't really judge it too harshly if that's what the issue is. Right? If that's the big problem is that he's a Republican doing Republican things. I can't get mad at it, just like I can't get mad at a Democrat doing Democratic things, a Democrat promoting Democrat policies. I'm not going to get mad about that kind of stuff. It's just par for the course. You just kind of have to understand, hey, you know what? Republicans going to try to get a conservative Supreme Court justice on who has the interpretation of the forefathers of our country, right? I can expect that's what they're going to do. And I can expect that the Democrats, they're going to be trying to find much more progressive and a loose interpretation of the Constitution. Those are the guys that they're going to be going after, because they want to try to warp society in their favor, whereas it's in the best interest of the Republicans to keep things maintained as they currently are, because conservatives, right? And so I'm not going to get mad about any of that kind of stuff. And I don't know. I think there's big differences between what the complaints really are under Trump as to Biden. Trump, everybody was upset about the things he was saying. Biden, people are upset about the things he's doing. He's got the war in Afghanistan. He's got the 45 plus. I mean, I think last I heard it's probably somewhere in the 60 billion. To taking our money and giving it away. Oh, then there's the student loan forgiveness, which, while it's not the worst thing in the world because it's at least helping out our people, a lot of people are going to be pretty upset because they're like, oh, so you're just effectively giving people $10,000. And this is one of the big kickers. If you have if you had paid off your loans within this time frame, you'll get the like $10,000. And I'm like, well, what about people who didn't go? Do we just get $10,000 then? Because honestly, I think that if the government just said, all the American people, you get $10,000. Everybody just gets $10,000. And if you have a school student loan, it's going to get applied to that first, right? But people who didn't go through school, they get the 10,000, they can do whatever they want with it, right? They can go to school if they want to, you know, or they can buy a house. Maybe they've learned a trade, you know, that didn't require college or school, you know. And so, while it's not the worst thing in the world, it's pretty unfair, and it's basically another situation where it's me paying other people for something, and that was their decision. That's their decision, and if they weren't aware of it, or they weren't educated on it, or whatever the situation is, I was like, man, I don't know what I want to do. I don't know what field I want to get into, and what I don't want is, I don't want a bunch of debt, and so I'm not going to go until and unless I know what I want to learn, what I want to dive into, and what I'm going to put my degree towards. If I had known, oh yeah, you know, if you've got student loan, we'll just pay it. I would have been like, up to like 10K. I would have been like, shoot, I would have just taken out a 10K loan, done as much schooling as I could with that 10K in an area that I felt was worth the risk, and then snap my fingers, you know, a couple years later, all that debt gets wiped out. That would have been pretty nice. Like, it would have given me an option and an opportunity to take that chance, right? But I didn't take the chance, and I get screwed over in the end because I don't have the education in those fields, and I don't have the 10K. So I'm like, okay, you know, it's just a shitty situation. It's just crappy, you know? So I think people's priorities and what they should be focused on is you know, I don't think that it's in the proper spots, and I think people are kind of caring a lot about the wrong things. I'd much rather live in a world where we did not have a whole bunch of wars and conflicts all over the world. And I think that it was actually a privilege for people to be so entitled and like free of real problems, that they can complain about the kinds of things that they complained about, right? They had to seek out issues. They had to seek out problems, seek out things that they could take offense of. And I think that's really unfortunate. So I think that's all that I want to say up to this point. I know brief. I guess I should probably just say, hey, whenever I say brief, you should probably think that this is going to be roughly an hour video, because I don't really do things too briefly. I talk a lot, and I try to be as clear as I can. So, all right. I guess that'll be that. Take it easy.